Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Stephen, Rashbi, if you will, Rabbi Shmuel ben Yehoshua, with this week's 10-minute Torah. So this week we are going to be reading the Parashat of Shoftim, which means Judges. And here it is. Well, we're coming into September. And we are into the month of Elul, and we are technically in the high holiday season. The high holiday season starts with the month of Elul. Now, interesting point, and I'm not sure if I made this last week, so please bear with me if I did, but during the month of Elul, we recite Psalm 27, which is a psalm for the penitential season. And this psalm is recited from the first of Elul. It says Rosh. Some places say Rosh Chodesh Elul until Shemini Atzeret. And during Shemini Atzeret, we do the prayer for rain. And we start, during the Amidah, Mashiva Ruach, Marina Gashem, Hashem, who makes the wind to blow and the rain to fall. Now, Elul is a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, 2-day new month. And the reason it's a 2-day new month is because the month of Av is a 30-day month. Whenever you have a 30-day month going into another month, you have 2 days of Rosh Chodesh. Now, the first day, which falls on Shabbat, is actually the 30th of Av. And, I kind of did some research on this and wrestled with it a little bit. So Shabbat is the first day of Rosh Chodesh, and then Yom Rishon, which we call Sunday, is the first day of Elul. So technically, we would not recite, and we're not going to recite, Psalm 27 on Shabbat, because technically it's not Elul, even though it's Rosh Chodesh Elul. Now, some people might say, well, we're going to recite it anyway because it is Rosh Chodesh Elul. Okay. It's not one of those things where, you have to absolutely do it perfectly. Judaism is not like that. In fact, Shoftim, we get, it opens up. Now, this isn't in our triennial portion, but it is in the portion. And interestingly enough, the Parsha is almost exclusively devoted to justice. That's unusual for Parshas. They jump around a little bit. They might, for example, you might have the Sota, the woman that's suspected of having an affair. Then you have the wayward son, and you've got, actually, I'm sorry, let me take that back. The wayward son is right after when you take a woman in battle, when you conquer another people, and you fall in love with, or you have lust, let's call it what it is, and a man has relations with a foreign woman, a woman of the people that they're conquering, and now he decides he wants to marry her, and there's a whole process he goes through, and the next step is the wayward son. There's kind of a relation between these two concepts, but it's kind of a jump in a way. Whereas in Shoftim, it's all justice all the time. And it starts out with that maxim, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. So here we've got actually two words for justice. We've got Shoftim, which is judgment, okay? And then we have tzedek, which is justice. And the Hebrew word for charity is tzedek, which is justice, because when you're doing charity, you're doing justice. For example, we've talked about the idea of Shemitah, of release of debts, right? And we talk about what happens if you have and this is in Re'eh, this is right here. If you have a slave that decides he doesn't want to meet, he loves his master, wants to stay with him, you bore his ear to the wall, and that's the way it is, okay? Here we have kind of a continuation of that, because this new generation that is going to conquer and settle the land is going to have to set up a system of courts. Now, the priests are basically going to be a big part of that. And we're also going to have sort of a court of three, a Beit Din. Now, remember, this is before rabbis were invented, so to speak. Before, you had the Sadducees that were the priests, and you had the Pharisees that were the rabbis, and had a couple of other cults here and there. But those were the two main forces, and the Pharisees became the rabbis, they became the teachers. And these days, when we have really kind of a vestige of the priestly system, we do have the Kohanim and Levites, and they do get the first, respectively, two aliyot when we're reading Torah. But they don't really do the duties that they did when, the great temple was standing. So we have a court of Beit Din. So now we've got some interesting concepts. And the interesting thing, too, about Judaism is that there was no separation of church and state. I don't want to see, let's say synagogue, or synagogue and state. The synagogue and the state were one and the same. So when you had a king that was ascending the throne, that king had to either A, write a Torah scroll for himself, or B, have one written for him. Either way, that king was mandated to study Torah every day. That way he knew the laws, and he had to follow the laws. So the monarchy in Israel was not like the monarchy in other lands. In other lands, other peoples, other heritages, other cultures, the king was a god. Not so with us. And, we use the term Judaism, but technically it wasn't really Judaism back then. It was not that it was something else, but it was a little different. Now, we follow the same laws today, okay? But it's sort of a different system. Back then, we basically lived in one area, and the king had to obey the Torah. The king was not above the law. The king could not change the law, even though we did have, in the succession of the monarchs, we did have kings that thought they were above the law, and they found out pretty quick, maybe sometimes not so quick, that they were not above the law. So the king had to study Torah because the king had to know the laws. And the king was almost a figurehead because we had Torah. And it was Torah that really ruled the land. So when you had a case against a neighbor, or when there was a crime, they followed Torah. And it was actually very simple. You had to have been warned, and two witnesses need to have seen you do it. And you need witnesses. Now, we talk about the death penalty. What we call lex talionis, life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, bruise for bruise, life for life. The only time that was taken literally was life for life. And for there to be an execution, there had to be a lot of hoops jumped through, and some people say there never really was an execution. You had to have been known to lay in wait for somebody, and then you need to carry it out. And again, you need to have been warned. There need to be two witnesses that see you do it, and they need to be called. And guess what? If the court finds you guilty, it is those witnesses that execute you. So, big responsibility. Now, these days, a lot of people are out for vengeance. And you see when people are executed, you see the people sitting there and they watch the execution. Okay, that's a lot different than pulling the switch yourself or releasing the gas yourself, is watching. If someone said, okay, this person killed your whoever, and we knew that they planned it and we've proved it beyond a shadow of a doubt, and we're going to put them in front of, let's say, a firing squad and you're going to get to shoot the gun. Would you be able to do it? And that's one of the considerations in testifying against somebody. Now, even though lex talionis, and that's what it's called, law of the tally, law of the retribution, says eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life, it was never meant to be taken literally because that was not considered humane. Let's say, for example, you have an unfortunate experience and you cause your neighbor's eye to be poked out. Now remember, this is over 3,000 years ago. Okay, today, if we were going to do that, you can go to a doctor and they would do surgery and they would, take out the eye, and that's your punishment. Back then, okay, what if the person doing that were to cause bleeding and the person bleeds out and dies? Then what? Now you have to execute the person that did the surgery because life for life, tooth for tooth, right? Okay, so the sages figured, and by the way this is juxtaposed in other passages, it is a financial compensation. So you are compensated for loss, for the pain and suffering, for the fact that you can't do what you used to be able to do, and the humiliation. So there was a lot that went into the financial penalty. So, and this was considered fair. This was considered humane. And if you couldn't pay the penalty, what happens? You become an indentured servant. So that's a big part of this portion. So tzedek, tirdof, justice shall we pursue, all of us. We need to pursue justice. We need to be fair. Let's think about that. Shabbat shalom, happy Rosh Chodesh, and a happy Elul. And we're gearing up for our high holidays, and every day on Shachrit, that's not Shabbat. We also start blowing the shofar. Shabbat shalom.